Okay, so step one of using a pendulum is selecting a pendulum. Pendulums each have their own personalities. They're made up of particular crystals and metals. Sometimes they're just metal, sometimes they always have metal parts. But they'll have their own vibration, their own resonance. They each have their own shape. And you're going to want to find one that you can connect with. And if you are lucky enough to live near a metaphysical shop or a rock shop that has pendulums, then what you want to do is go to the stand where they have them and hold your hand beneath the pendulums and see which ones move and which have the best movement, not a chaotic movement, but a smooth movement. Because some of them can be chaotic. I've been in situations like that where they've just moved, they've been wild. And so I want one that communicates with me pretty smoothly. And you see that I'm not really getting any action here with this tiger's eye one, so I just don't think that that one really resonates that well with me. But these other ones really do. You see how they just start jumping around when I put my hand there? So I own all of these. I don't use all of them. But now that I'm doing this exercise, I might actually start using some of the ones that I haven't been using as much because they do seem to be much more resonant with me. I dropped this one and broke the metal tip off of it recently, so I think I'll glue that one back because this one's usually pretty responsive, this green aventurine. Now, you also may want to choose your pendulum based on the crystals that it's made of because they may particularly appeal to you. And if you have to buy online and you can't go and hand select it, then that might be a good way to go. Or also just looking at the pictures and seeing which one really speaks to you and choose that way. But you definitely want it to be a choice that you make out of your intuitive feeling about it. So once you select your pendulum, then the next step is to learn how to use it, and we'll go over that next. All right, so now to demonstrate for you how I use a pendulum. There are other ways to use it, but this is the way that I use one. So I chose the Dragon's Blood pendulum. This is one that was recently given to me by a good friend. And what I do is I hold it in my right hand. I put my left hand underneath, and then I try to establish, or I do establish every time really, the channels. Now, there are basically 3 different channels because with a pendulum, you pretty much can get a positive response and a negative response. So basically a yes and a no, or, you know, it's here or it's not here, it's good or it's bad. I have found that some people use pendulums. I've seen some psychics use pendulums and they just let it swing and then they have the answer they want. So I don't really understand that way of using it. For myself, I just use it as pretty much a yes or a no. And I establish the channels, and there are basically 3 channels. And by channels, I mean the higher dimensional being that I want to talk with. So I make sure that I hold my arm completely still, right? And then I'll say, higher self. I always like to include my higher self. Higher self, are you there? And you can see that my hand is completely still. I'm not moving it. And yet this pendulum started to move. And typically when my higher self talks to me, my higher self shows up as just front and back movement of the pendulum. And so my higher self is like, yes, I'm here. Now I want to say to my higher self, how will you express to me a no response? And you see it's the opposite. It swings to side instead of front to back. And that's how my higher self will give me a no response. Now I also like to often talk with Jesus. So I will say, Jesus, are you here? And he typically likes to swing the pendulum when Jesus comes through. And a yes for Jesus for me is typically going to be this clockwise motion. And you see that I'm not moving my arm, I'm not moving my fingers. Okay? Now, Jesus, if you have to tell me the answer no, how will you show me that? And it's counterclockwise. So it's moving in the opposite direction. And now for the third channel, I want to ask my spirit guide, who is a nun. Her name is, sometimes she goes by Verdelina, but I know her best as Wardell. And I'm going to ask, Wardell, are you here today? And she's here, and you see it's moving diagonally. And it's moving, from my perspective, left to right. So from the bottom to the top, or from, I guess, for me it would be southwest to northeast is a yes. And then, Wardell, if you need to tell me no, how would you tell me no? And she's going to swing it the opposite direction, from southeast to northwest. So from the lower right corner to the upper left corner is a no. And then a yes was from the lower left corner to the upper right corner. And you see that I am not moving. You see that my hand is perfectly still, and you want your hand to be perfectly still. And that way, the electrical impulses that are coming through from your subconscious, which is the gateway through which you connect with other dimensions. It's in your subconscious. And when you invite them in like this, then that's how they can communicate. And they communicate through electrical signals, and those electrical signals are coming through into the pendulum and moving the pendulum. So there's my higher self, like, happy to be here today and expressing herself. So see that? That's big time. Now you can choose whatever beings you want to talk to with your pendulum, and you can have up to 3 at a time. I haven't figured out any other way to do it, but up to 3 at a time. I typically always like to include my higher self. Typically, I always include Jesus. Sometimes I will want to talk to the higher selves of other people. So there are other people in my life, and I'm just going to want to get directly to their soul self to get a clearer answer of what's going on with the situation I may not understand, or to get guidance on something. And they don't, if it's somebody that you're having problems with, then sometimes they may not want to participate. And if they don't, then what you will find, you'll ask, are you there, higher self of whoever the person is? And the pendulum just won't move. So you're not going to be making that connection. It's not a good time for you to try to make that connection. So I have found that to be the case sometimes. But, most of the time I'm, not trying to connect with, people that I think really probably don't want to bother with me. But most of the time, yes. Most of the time I am able to talk with other people's higher selves and get yes and no answers. Or, just an either or type answer through the use of the pendulum and its movement. Now, I've heard people use these to buy vegetables. So they'll take their pendulum and hold it over the vegetable bins to pick like the best cucumber or whatever. I personally don't have that much time to use one of these when I'm grocery shopping. And plus, that has got to look weird. Can you imagine pulling out your pendulum in the Walmart, like over the yellow squash, and like, all right, no, I don't want this one. I mean, anyway, but God bless you, more power to you if you're going to do that. And these are also used for people to find water sources. And as I said, other people use them to help channel in their communications. Psychic readers I've seen do it. But that's how you use a pendulum, and they're really fun. So I recommend it. And, if you have a concern, I don't really, feel like I need to do this, but if you have a concern about, a negative entity coming through, then just before you start to use it, just, say, I am surrounded by love and light, and only beings of love and light may enter this space and communicate to me through this pendulum. And when you state that intention, it is done. So if that kind of thing concerns you, you can always protect yourself that way. But I know just from the nature of the beings that I call in, my higher self, Jesus, my spirit guide, the higher selves of, other people in my life, I don't, typically have that type of a concern. Anyway, it has been definitely a fun thing to do. I have used it to get a lot of very helpful information. So I wish you luck in using a pendulum.